What is up, and welcome to another edition of 40-Minute Debates, where two parties argue the most triggering social and political issues in 40 minutes or less. My name is Tyler Bluntman, and I will be your host today. Now, today's topic, socialism versus capitalism. So let's go ahead and introduce our contenders. Advocating for socialism is Tom, also known as, I forgot your name. Yes, I forgot to put it here as CrazyBeard71. I'll redo that part. CrazyBeard71. Okay. Let's introduce our contenders. Advocating for socialism is Tom, also known as CrazyBeard71 from the Socialist Hype House on TikTok. What is up, Tom?
Hey there.
Awesome. Advocating for capitalism is Ben, also known as BenjaminPolitics from the Classical Liberal Hype House on TikTok. What's up, Ben?
Hey, Tyler.
Hey, man, I'm good. So everybody else at home, I want you to know that you are going to be able to vote on who you believe won this debate on our Instagram page at 40 Minutes Debates. Now, remember, the person that wins the debate isn't necessarily the person who you agree with the most, but the person who made you think the most. The poll will only be open for 24 hours after this video airs, so please vote quickly. Now, let me tell you guys how this is going to break down. Each of you will get 3 minutes to present your opening statement. After this, we will have 6 rounds of rebuttals, 5 minutes each. During each rebuttal, one person will lead the conversation as they see fit. When it's your time, you can ask your opponent questions, address their stance, or forfeit any remaining time that you may not wish to use. The debate will then conclude with 2-minute closing statements from each of you. Do either of you have any questions before we get started?
Nope.
Awesome. Tom, we're going to go ahead and have you go first. Your 3 minutes is good. Start whenever you're ready, and the clock will start.
Alrighty, so I went ahead and read an opening statement. Here we go. To start out, I would like to define socialism. There is much confusion and fear on TikTok, social media, and the country in general over just this one simple word. Socialism is a political ideology and an economic structure in which the community as a whole seizes and controls the means of production. Everything from crops to manufacturing would be controlled by the community at large. Socialism was intended by its founders as an intermediate step between capitalism and communism. Capitalism is a system of haves and have-nots. You cannot do capitalism without having a low class, without having a class of people that are on the bottom. With socialism, we do not completely achieve equality, but we start to make that journey. We start to build a society that is bottom up, a society that focuses its view of success based on the general well-being of its working class members. Instead of putting the rich on a pedestal, socialism will work to lay the foundations of a society that cares about its members, a society where hunger is actively battled against, where education is actively provided, where healthcare is actively given, and no one goes without shelter or food or water or anything like that. Socialism, I feel, is superior to capitalism because it doesn't leave out a bottom class. It starts to equalize us and starts to make us into a society where everyone can thrive. Right now in capitalism, at least in America, we have a huge wealth gap. We have some people doing really good and some people doing really bad. Yes, this exists, but not as much. We need to bring that gap closer together. And that would be basically my opening statement.
Awesome. All right. And I'll reset the clock here. Ben, are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
All right, go ahead and get started, sir.
I came here today to defend capitalism. Before I go any further, I would like to be precise in what I'm referring to when I'm referring to by capitalism. When I say capitalism, I'm referring to the separation of state and economics. This is the only definition of capitalism I'm willing to defend. In Marx's theory of history, he talked about ancient class conflict. For once, Marx got something partially right. There is indeed a class conflict, but not in between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. It is between the political class and the productive class. We live in a world where some of us produce services to survive and others coercively extract those services to survive. Some people create wealth and others forcibly redistribute it. It gets even better. This class conflict is maintained through the invisible hand, not Adam Smith's invisible hand, but the government's. The political class has successfully used this invisible hand to blame the problems of our time on the free market. Almost every problem blamed on the free market was created by the political class's invisible hand. This invisible hand has allowed for a system where the government can break your leg and provide you with a crutch and say, see, if it was not for me, you could not walk. This invisible hand has successfully allowed the government to be the only institution that goes trillions of dollars into debt and kills millions of people and gets bigger as a result. Capitalism has been blamed for poverty, crime, death, and all sorts of atrocities. However, lacking in this analysis is a true description of the state of nature. In this state of nature, the expectation was that life was poor, short, brutish, and painful. What has given this entitlement, this prosperity, is capitalism. Capitalism is the only moral and successful system. As a result, we must embrace it and not reject it. And that's my opening statement.
All right. All right, so Tom, we are going to open up with our rebuttal rounds. Your 5 minutes, I have said it. This is your time. Use it as you see fit. Go ahead and get started whenever you're ready.
Alrighty. So Benjamin brings up a point of capitalism creating prosperity within our time. I would argue that we do not have prosperity for everyone. In America, yes, we do have a middle class and we do have an upper class. They're doing rather okay. But even the middle class is struggling. In America, according to Forbes in 2019, 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. What this means is people don't have savings. And if they have savings, it's very minimal. And this wealth gap that we have is so massive because that's what capitalism is. It's a system of haves and have-nots. No economic system is evil inherently, right? But some are set up in a way that certain people can be taken advantage of. Socialism has its pros and cons just like capitalism does, but at least in socialism, what we have is we have an effort to balance the scales so that we don't have this and this, we have more of a this thing. And also, Benjamin also mentioned that he wants to keep the market, the economy, I believe he said the economy and the state separate, right?
Right.
In socialism, one of the big, massive differences between communism and socialism is socialism can exist within capitalism. That is usually referred to as democratic socialism, what Bernie Sanders went for, and that's what I was personally for up until recently. And that, instead of having revolution, instead of having a huge shift, we reform, right? We have things like Medicare for all. We have things like education all the way up to college level. It's not necessarily, socialism is not necessarily state and market. It can just be about the market. It can stay out of the state and vice versa. Socialism is also, for many socialists and communists, it's an intermediary step. Personally, I would love to see communism happen, and the difference there, the massive difference in my opinion, is you're going to get rid of currency, you're going to get rid of all class, and you're really going to get rid of state too. But I would settle for socialism, and in America, I'd probably even settle for democratic socialism. I'm just tired of the fact that we have Americans that are struggling to feed their families, and in the next 5 years, it's estimated that Jeff Bezos, this is also according to Forbes, is going to become the world's first trillionaire, and yet we have a pandemic, and yet we have Americans lining up for food around the corner, just like you would say happens in communism. We have a problem. We have a problem and it needs to be fixed. And I inherently believe that capitalism will fall one day. It's just, what are we going to replace it with? Are we going to replace it with socialism, or are we going to go back to a feudal society? Because that's where we're trending right now. We have such wealth inequality that we're getting to the point where we're going to have kings and lords and serfs and peasants.
2 minutes.
And I think that is just absolutely unacceptable, especially because this is one thing capitalism has done for America. We are the richest nation in the world. I will give capitalism that. But can't we take that wealth and reinvest it into our society and start helping the people at the bottom? Because really, everyone loves to say America is the #1 country, right? But by what metric? By the billionaires, or by the fact that we're #1 in the prison population? We could do a lot of things to make this country better, and socialism is a good step towards that. And that'll be the end of my first round.
Okay. All right, Ben. I've reset the clock. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, go ahead and get started whenever you're ready.
All right, I'll try to address as much as I can from what you just said. So
Sorry.
first of all, like you said, socialism can exist within capitalism. Like, what did you mean by that specifically?
So one of the big differences between socialism and communism is socialism doesn't have to necessarily be both society and economics. It can be just the state. We can have you know what Bernie Sanders was doing, right?
Real quick,
That would be
I'm so sorry
socialism.
to interrupt, but you said the difference between capitalism, communism. We're arguing socialism.
No, the difference between socialism and communism, because a lot of people say that
Oh, okay.
communism
I'm so
isn't.
sorry. So sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
sorry. But basically, what Bernie Sanders wants, that would be socialism existing within capitalism.
Yeah, I would say like he wants like a social democracy.
Correct.
So I wouldn't really consider that. People have like different opinions on like what constitutes socialism. Some would say wealth redistribution. Specifically, it's going to be the workers owning the means of production. So if you are talking about wealth redistribution, then like a social democracy or Keynesian economics, then you would be correct. But if we're just talking about like the ownership of the workers, then how would that exist like alongside capitalism, like from what you're talking about?
And you're correct. That would not exist. I guess a better way to term it in modern terminology is democratic socialism can exist as well.
Okay. Now, I would actually say it can exist, and it does. We have these things called worker co-ops, where workers actually do own equal parts in companies. And the great thing about capitalism is they do allow this. Capitalism allows for freedom to experiment with socialism. And I don't have a problem with someone going and starting a worker co-op. The issue I have is when the government uses coercion, or a group of people uses coercion to take a business and then create like a worker co-op or a worker-owned business out of it. And that's the difference between capitalism and socialism. Capitalism says, yes, it's all about freedom, so you can have socialism, but you can't force socialism upon others. Socialism says you can't have capitalism, you have to have socialism. You get what I'm saying with that?
Yes.
Yeah. And I know what you're talking about, like the social democracy, but I'm talking more specifically about like actual socialism and the ownership of the means of production. All right. So like you mentioned about Jeff Bezos, yeah, he's really rich. I would disagree with the whole trillionaire thing. That was a study done last year, and it didn't account for a lot of different things, like Jeff Bezos' divorce. He announced recently he was donating $10 billion to climate change research. He just announced he was donating $4 billion to COVID-19 and other stuff like that. So I don't think
2
it
minutes.
fully accounts for everything. But I mean, maybe he will become a trillionaire. But we look at like Amazon, and the government allows them to get away without paying taxes. As a free market capitalist, I would be against that, because not just for the taxes, but because they're treating them better than other corporations. They're giving them an advantage, and we don't like that. We don't want a certain corporation being given an advantage by the government and being able to take over all the little corporations, and people getting uber rich because the government is helping them. If someone gets really rich because they came up with a great idea and they worked their way up, then that's fine. But we have a government that's not running on capitalism, but corporatism and cronyism. We have these corporations lobbying for regulations, and these regulations give them more and more power, and it creates monopolies. And this is what's creating this wealth gap that you're talking about. When you have more economic freedom, you actually have less of a wealth gap. And I'll go ahead and stop right there.
Okay. All right. Tom, go ahead and get started whenever you want.
All right. So I too will try to respond to some of your points here. I want to start with the lobbyingism, and I just wanted to ask you, do you agree that we should do away with lobbyism at the very least?
Yes.
Okay. Because I can get behind that. Lobbying has caused a lot of the problems that we have. I can definitely give you that. And then on the Jeff Bezos being a trillionaire thing, you're correct. It is speculation, but it's very likely to happen, especially with this pandemic, because I mean, as a self-described socialist, even I'm buying things from Amazon, and I hate that. But what can you do? Like, you can't go to Walmart, you can't go anywhere. He's got kind of an artificial monopoly right now, not to any doing of his own. Yeah, and then the other thing I wanted to talk about was worker co-ops. We have one of those here in the Midwest called Hy-Vee. And yes, they're better than, just standard business because you get stock options and you have a say in your store or whatever it is that you're running. But in a socialist society, that's the norm, right? If we get to a place where society controls the means of production, that kind of thing, that happens everywhere. And I know some people are against that. They would say that the millionaire, the trillionaire, the boss deserves to reap the benefits of his staff. But honestly, I'm much more concerned about the 99% than I am the 1%. Because again, we just have such a huge gap here. And it's not 100% in America anymore that fears socialism. It's taken a long time because we had McCarthyism back when the Soviet Union was in power, and we had the Soviet Union, which was one of our enemies for the longest time. But according to a study done by Pew Research, overall, 61% of Americans say there is too much economic inequality in the country in the country today. But views differ by political party and household income level. A lot of Americans agree that we have a problem with this wealth gap. The problem is we don't all agree on how to fix it. You have ideas of how to regulate the system and make it more of a free market, you said, right?
Or deregulate, yeah.
Deregulate, okay. And some of us on the socialist / communist side, we would say deregulation is good as well, but we definitely don't want one person like Jeff Bezos controlling that much of the resources there. Because when you have something like money, right, it's a finite resource. That's one of the big problems with capitalism is there's only so much money. If Jeff Bezos has 30 trillion of it, which he doesn't, but if he did, that's a lot of the available capital out there. How does everyone else get their hand on that money? And that's really one of the key reasons that I personally would want to see a revolution to where we start
2
to
minutes.
regulate that. We want to make sure that there's not people down here when there's people up here. And I guess I will end there.
Okay. You guys are like the first people to start just like ending your time in like 2 minutes. First
Well,
time.
you should have saw our first debate. We're like really friendly to each other for some
First
reason.
time for everything.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. 5 minutes back on the clock. Ben, are you ready, sir?
Yep, I'm ready.
All right, go ahead, man.
So as far as wealth inequality, I can get how you see it as an issue. Fundamentally, I don't see it as an issue. I more see like poverty, things like that as the issue. Because if you're looking at someone who has like $50 and he's next to someone who has $51, or sorry, I need to make sure I do this math correctly in my head. Okay, so wealth inequality. So you have someone who has like $50 next to someone who has $100, or you have someone who has $100 next to someone with $1,000. One guy has more wealth inequality, but he has more wealth in general. So it's not as much of an issue. And I think you would agree with that. So that's why I would focus more on poverty itself. And there's definitely issues that I could point out with America, like the high healthcare costs and housing and college. But these issues are caused by the government. And this is why I don't think that we should rely on the government to try and fix it. So like college, prices really started going up when the government decided to try and help people. And they didn't end up helping people. They said, hey, we're going to take over the loans and not let the banks do it. And because of this, they would give people who really shouldn't have gotten loans. Before that, people would go to the bank and they would say, hey, I want to go to college for this. And the bank wants to make their money back. So they have to be careful how they loan their money. So if someone's choosing a very bad field where they're not going to make money, then the bank isn't going to give them the money for that. So it made people be more careful, made them not have to go into these failing fields and failing majors. And then when the government came in, they just gave everyone loans. So people started going into these bad fields. And then with the colleges, everyone gets money. So everyone just comes anyways, no matter how expensive it is, because they get all the money they need from the government. And so they just raise prices. And then as far as like healthcare goes, you've got a lot of regulations. Like we have regulations on how many doctors we can have. We have like the FDA, which takes forever to put out life-saving drugs, they actually, a lot of people, they talk about the FDA and they're like, oh, it saves a lot of lives, but there's been many studies done and they actually cause a lot more deaths than lives they save. And, you have things like drug patents that last 20 years plus. There's a thing called, I think it's called greening, where they can even extend the patents even more. And when you have this patent on a life-saving drug, you can charge however much you want for it. And, you see things like insulin and EpiPens, stuff like that. And the FDA and the government helps these companies maintain these monopolies. And we would both, like, it may surprise you, but you would look at this stuff and say, oh, that's bad. But I look at it and say it's bad too. I don't want these companies having these monopolies and charging people tons of monies and making all this profit off of their suffering. So, which is why I think, like, for the first time in 47 years, I think it is, drug prices are actually going down. And this is because the Trump administration sped up FDA approval. So we have a lot more generic drugs. And so it creates competition, and this is driving the prices down. And I'll just go ahead and end right there.
Okay.
All right.
All right, Tom, this is your last 5-minute rebuttal. So make it good, man.
Okay. So I'll start by addressing a couple of things here. You mentioned that banks were giving out loans, or if banks were giving out loans, college would be a little bit better because you'd have, you basically have the banks making sure they go into good fields. Is that a good summary of what you said there?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay. So in a socialist society, we believe there are no bad fields. It shouldn't be determined on the economy. The economy should not determine what you can and cannot do. You should be able to do whatever your heart wants you to do. And I know a lot of people are going to argue, well, what about innovation? What about who's going to be a doctor, right? If everything is okay and doable, who's going to take the risks? Someone's going to do it, right? Look at TikTok. TikTok is a system where who is actually making money off TikTok? Yet there's innovation. The only way you make money on TikTok, to my knowledge, and if someone knows a way to make money, hit me up. But to my knowledge, what you do is you have the live streams and you have those little emojis people pay you for, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't get paid for ad revenue or anything like that. And yet people still make funny content. People still innovate. Human beings want to innovate. Human beings want to drive society forward. And then as far as all the other stuff about the FDA and doctors, yeah, you're 100% right. We both agree that those things are bad. We have a different way of fixing it. When it comes to socialism, I think a lot of people are just terrified of the word socialism. They're terrified of the word communism. They look at Stalin, they look at Mao, they look at Lenin, and they don't see both sides of history. They see the American narrative. Now, I am not saying that Stalin did not do horrible, terrible things. I would encourage anybody who wants to learn more to look into the policies and look into what they believed and not necessarily look through the Americanized version of what happened. I would definitely also encourage people to look into Cuba. Cuba's actually not as bad as you think it is. Yes, they're impoverished, but it's not because of socialism. One statistic I have here is for every 10 Cuban students compared to 15 in the United States, that's how many teachers there are. There's one teacher for every 10 students in Cuba, as to where in the United States there's one per 15. Infant mortality is lower in Cuba than it is in America. And Cuba has twice as many doctors per 1,000 patients as the United States, which could be explained by what you were talking about, how there's that limit.
Right.
Which we definitely need to get rid of because that is just dumb. But yeah, Cuba's not all bad. I would encourage anybody who's curious about socialism or communism, please, 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 please look into it, because it's not this scary, horrible thing. It's not all gulags and death camps. It's not all toilet paper shortages and everything like that. It's actually a beautiful thing. And if we do it right, we can have a society where we don't have this and this anymore, where we have more of an equal playing field. Until we get to communism, we're never going to have this.
2 minutes. I'm sorry.
Oh, 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Little under 2 minutes, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess what I would say is just please don't be afraid of communism. It's not, and please don't be afraid of socialism. It's not that scary. And I would definitely say look into McCarthyism. I think that is what is holding us back. And I put this last thing in this last round here. I also believe that if we didn't have the Cold War, we'd already be the socialist society. If you look at Europe, they're heading more towards democratic socialism, and maybe one of them is going to try socialism here in the next couple decades or so. We'll just have to see. I'll end it there.
Okay. All right, Ben, this is your last 5 minutes. Go ahead and get
All
started
right.
whenever you're ready.
Okay, so a few things I want to address. I'll go ahead and start with the last thing you said. I would actually disagree. There's many, like the Scandinavian countries, which are headed more towards capitalism at the moment. And like Sweden, for example, they already tried socialism and they went bankrupt. That was in the 90s, I believe. And back in the 1800s, before 1870, Sweden was the poorest country in Europe. And then in 1870, they switched to a very free market capitalism. And by the 1940s, they were one of the richest countries in Europe, and it brought them great prosperity. And then they decided, hey, let's redistribute some of this wealth we have. And then that's when they set them on the path to socialism, and then they failed. And I have a question. Would Cuba be your like best example for socialism, or would you have like a better one?
I would say probably Bolivia would be the best example.
Okay. So Bolivia is they've got some socialist programs. They're actually less socialist than somewhere like Venezuela. So, you know, people who say, oh, well, Venezuela didn't fail because of socialism, and then they say, well, Bolivia succeeded because of socialism. That doesn't really work, since, you know, you have to have it one way or the other. Either neither of them are socialists, or they're both socialists. So as far as like Cuba goes, you mentioned like infant mortality. Infant mortality is measured differently in many different countries. Some countries, you're not, how do I explain this? Okay, so like in America, they measure, or they count like miscarriages with infant mortality. I think in Cuba, it has to be 8 weeks after they're born, if I'm not mistaken. It might even be longer than that. And not only that, but there was a paper published in Oxford where some guys talked about Cuba's infant mortality rates and their life expectancy rate. And they said that it's very, very likely that the government has been misrepresenting this. And not only this, but their doctors, because their doctors are incentivized to lie about these things, because if they don't meet certain quotas, then they get in big trouble from the government. And you mentioned like the number of teachers and doctors, which I agree those are good things. And, you know, like I said, we should have more doctors in America. But the healthcare they have there is really bad. It's really bad quality. They have good healthcare quality for like tourists and stuff. So, you know, if you have Americans going and visiting over there, then they do experience this good healthcare. But if they don't actually get deep into the country, then they don't see all these issues. Like some hospitals actually wash like latex gloves instead of just throwing them away because they can't get any more latex gloves. And then you didn't mention like how many people can read, but in Cuba they actually count, like if you can just write your name, then you're
2
literate.
minutes.
So, but you didn't mention it, but I just thought I'd throw that out there. Okay. I'm trying to remember some of the stuff you said before. All right, well, I'll just kind of wrap this up a bit. Okay, so the issue I have with socialism, like you're talking about, you don't want people to be scared of socialism and communism. But the thing with them is you have to use coercion. If you want to give the means of production to the workers, you have to steal it away from the owners. If you want to redistribute wealth, you have to take it by means of coercion. Like today, we have taxes, and we have a certain amount of redistribution in America. And if you don't pay these taxes, then you go to jail. If you resist going to jail, then you're going to get shot. And this is using coercion. With capitalism, it's trying to exclude coercion. It's trying to just let people have the freedom to do what they want to do. And they can build these communes and help each other out. And there's been things like this in the past. There's things like poverty insurance, where communities would come together and pitch in some money. And if one of them like lost their job or their house, then they would take that money and help them. But they did it voluntarily. And that's what I like. I like people helping each other voluntarily. The United States has more charity than any other country by far. We help so many people in other countries and in our own country.
30 seconds.
And I want to free up resources that are taken from us by the government. And then I want to take certain areas, like I mentioned, healthcare, college, and housing, get those prices down by means of the free market and free up even more money. And then when we have all this money, we'll be better off, and then we'll be able to help the people who are worse off. And I'll go ahead and stop right there.
Awesome. All right. So, guys, we're going to move into our closing statements now. No interruptions or anything like that in your closing statements. You have 2 minutes to wrap everything up. Tom, you're going to be first. So if you want to address anything that Ben just said, or if you have a prepared closing statement, either is good. So go ahead and get started whenever you are ready. 2 minutes is on the clock.
Alrighty, so I would start by addressing one thing that you said. You'd said that with socialism, it's coercion. If socialism ever happens, if we ever get to a true social society, or even beyond that into communism, it'll be because the workers rose up. It'll be because we have a majority that wants these things. It's never going to be a loud few that makes this happen. It's going to be something that's mostly consensual. Yes, you're going to have your people that disagree with it. That's always going to happen. There's never going to be 100% agreement there. But like I was saying in my last round, please don't be afraid of socialism. Read up on it. It is actually a very beautiful thing. I am actually pretty new at the socialism thing. I was behind Bernie, and I was a Democratic socialist for the longest time until one day I just started reading and I started finding out, okay, there's a different version of history. There's a version of history where these people were not trying to create death and terror. They were trying to create a society in which the working class, as you said, the proletariats, which I was going to avoid, are actually taken care of, and the bourgeoisie are not, boots on top of them. I would say to anybody who is curious about it, look it up, make your own opinions. But it's not evil, and I believe it's superior to capitalism. Because right now we have people going hungry, we have people going without shelter, we have people going without food and water and education and health care. We have people that are starving right now.
30 seconds.
It's just, in the biggest, most powerful country in the world, how do we let that happen? How do we let that happen? And that, I think, would be the end of that.
All right, Benjamin, 2 minutes to go ahead and wrap up anything that you have to say.
All right. So again, I agree with all these different issues we have in the United States, but I would say that's a problem with statism, not capitalism. If you trace back each of these issues, then you find it usually goes back to the government rather than the free market. And the free market's the one that's always trying to fix these things. Like we have the coronavirus pandemic right now. The government, they were getting out these tests, and they took forever to approve them. Then when they did get us tests, some of them were actually pre-infected with the coronavirus, and they were stopping private companies from testing. Well, one private company actually ignored those regulations, and they started testing out in Washington, and they found out there's an outbreak there because of that. Then continuing on, the government was having a hard time keeping up. And then all these private companies, MyPillow, Ford, GMC, Tesla, Coors, and et cetera, all these companies started doing things like making masks, making ventilators, hand sanitizer. Some CEOs actually gave up their salaries in order to keep paying the employees. And that's a very good example where we see the government fails and the free market steps in and actually helps people. And like I mentioned before, we do more charity than any other country. We're already doing a lot to help. But these certain programs that are trying to help, like the war on poverty, which really isn't helping people get out of poverty.
20 seconds.
It's actually making things a lot worse. It's tearing down the families. Now it's like 75% of Black families don't have a father, 25% of white families don't have a father. And they used to be much better before you had all these welfare programs come in, but they incentivize people to not have fathers. But when you have charity, people are actually much better off.
All right. And that is a wrap, guys. That is the capitalism versus socialism debate. Y'all have fun?
Yeah. Have fun.
Awesome, man. Awesome. So where can Ben, where can people find you online, man, if they want to go ahead and find you?
You can find me at BenjaminPolitics on Instagram and TikTok, and Classical Liberal Hype House on TikTok.
Awesome. And what about you, Mr. Crazy Beard?
On TikTok, I'm at CrazyBeard71, and I also have the Socialist Type House on TikTok, which is at SocialistHH.
All right. So what about you guys listening at home? Who had the better arguments? Remember that you can vote on who you think won on our Instagram page at 40-minute debates, but the poll is only open for 24 hours, so make sure that you vote quickly. And if you enjoyed this debate and you want to hear more, then make sure that you follow us on IG, subscribe to us on YouTube, and until next time.